Hi, and welcome to another unfiltered, unscripted Autistic film. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll probably know that autism research is a recurring theme. We've talked about how research has historically been conducted by researchers who are themselves not autistic and the distorted view of us that brings with it. We've covered the money behind much of current research and how it has a vested interest in casting autism as being a tragedy, even an epidemic in need of urgent attention. Recently, I talked about the obscenity of money being spent researching autism cures that aren't wanted when genuinely life-changing diseases and conditions are left struggling for funding. Today, the subject is the mindset of the autism research establishment and how it's reflected in a 30-year-old episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. When Star Trek returned to our screens in the late 80s, it was always intended to carry on the tradition of holding up a mirror to the issues of the day to reflect on how we can make our society better in the here and now. It continued to do that in part by setting an example with its, by 1980 standards, diverse main cast. In the original series, one of the most memorable characters on the bridge of the Enterprise was Spock, who, being half Vulcan, allowed us as viewers to see how the emotional, sometimes rash decision-making of the human captain might look through logical, rational eyes. Spock provided a balance to the Enterprise crew, offering a much-needed touch of order and even compassion when tempers were high. In The Next Generation, or TNG, the writers gave us Lieutenant Commander Data, an android, to fill Spock's role of dispassionate observer and calm, knowledgeable stability in testing times. Data quickly became a fan favourite and, unbeknownst to the majority of the audience, also became an icon to autistic people the world over. Data's attempts to understand the emotional drivers of humanity, to share in human experiences and to emulate their often contradictory behaviours and customs, struck a chord in the hearts and minds of autists who recognised elements of our own experience in Data's story. Whilst I was diagnosed several years before TNG hit the screens, even I didn't understand the full implications to autism of one of its most popular episodes when it was first broadcast in 1989 in the States and probably 91 or 92 over here. The Measure of a Man has long been renowned as one of TNG's finest moments. Just in case you need it, I suppose I better put a spoiler warning here because I'm going to talk about the plot. The Measure of a Man was made in the aftermath of the infamous Hollywood writers' strike, which held up the production of loads of American movies and TV shows. It was intended to be an inexpensive mid-season bottle episode. In other words, one which used readily available stock sets and didn't require expensive exterior shots or special effects. Yet it turned out to be one of the most memorable and influential moments in the whole of Star Trek. Even now, I think it's rated at 9.2, I think, on IMDb. The plot is straightforward. A cyberneticist named Bruce Maddox wants to dismantle Data to see how he works, because he wants to build more androids like him. Data was more or less unique, having been built in secret by an eccentric genius named Dr. Noonien Sung. Since Sung's work was done off the grid so to speak. His ideas and designs weren't on record. So Maddox saw taking data apart as the only way of understanding what made him tick. When Maddox tells Captain Picard, Data's commanding officer, of his plans, Picard is understandably uncomfortable. Maddox can't offer any assurances that Data will be safe through his procedure, or that he would be the same after being reassembled. So Picard refuses. Maddox won't take no for an answer, and so he has Data transferred to his command instead, so he can order him to do it. The only way Data can now avoid this grisly fate is to resign his commission. So he chooses to leave his chosen career, his life on the Enterprise and his friends, rather than be taken to pieces and studied. On hearing of this, the scientist, Maddox, claims that Data can't resign because he lacks the sentience to make such a decision. And he gets a legal opinion that Data is an object, the property of Starfleet, and therefore he can be treated, well, like the legal counsel put it, like a toaster. After that, we have a tense court hearing over whether Data is a sentient being with his own agency, capable of making decisions and deserving the same rights as his crewmates, or an object to be traded and broken up as property. The episode has long been looked on as an exploration of how we define slavery. Maddox desired to create thousands of replicas of Data, which he freely admits are disposable people, very clearly echoes the treatment of people as property that's shamed the developed nations of the world and led directly to the racial disparity we still see in our societies today. It's also widely held to be an introduction to the arguments surrounding the morals of artificial intelligence. At what point do we cease to treat an AI as a tool like we do a computer and acknowledge it as being alive? With such powerful underlying themes already identified, why am I here talking about how it's also relevant to the autistic experience? And why now, 30 years later? There's a trend within autism research that's been present since the beginning. And this week, I saw something which took that trend to an extreme. On the 6th of November 2020, an article was published in the Journal of Neuroscience, which went beyond the pale in its representation of autism, which plumbed the depths of desperation to justify its existence. Like Bruce Maddox being willing to cast doubt on the right of a sentient being to not want to be dissected, these researchers have gone to extraordinary lengths to deny the rights of autistic people to be fairly represented. The article was called "Right Temporoparietal Junction Underlies Avoidance of Moral Transgression in Autism Spectrum Disorder." Let me read you the opening. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is characterized by a core deficit in theory of mind ability, which extends to perturbations in moral judgment and decision-making. The reaction of most autistic people reading that is, here we go again. They're saying we don't have any empathy and we don't understand right and wrong. They'll say we're all potential criminals and we hurt people because we don't understand how we cause pain to other people. The researchers were trying to prove a point. So how do they go about it? They put a bunch of autistic people and non-autistic people, which they called healthy controls, in an fMRI scanner to monitor their brain activity and ask them moral questions. They were asked to decide between a selfish option, which would benefit them, but hurt someone else, what they called bad context, or an altruistic option which would help others but at a personal cost, or good context. You can almost picture the ABA practitioners rubbing their hands together and counting the cash they would make out of this proof that autistic people are morally inferior and would need their training to bring us up to the right moral standard. So, what actually happened? I'll read from the article again. Compared with healthy controls, that's non-autistic people, individuals with ASD were much more likely to reject the opportunity to earn ill-gotten money by supporting a bad cause than healthy controls. So the results of their research was they found that something autistic people have observed about ourselves and discussed for years is measurably true. We commonly have a strong sense of morals, and given a choice, will usually take the moral high ground rather than be selfish or cruel. If you want to learn more about this, I talked about it in a video not long ago, which I'll link above. So, the research proved something to our advantage. Autistic people, under their test conditions, would be more likely to take the good context, altruistic option, rather than the bad context, selfish option. We prefer to disadvantage ourselves if it would help others, rather than hurt someone else for personal gain. That's a fine thing to hear proved. I mean, it's a shame they had to go to such lengths to prove something that's been obvious for years, but nonetheless it's good to see it acknowledged. Far from lacking empathy and putting our own needs ahead of others, as the broken record would have it, the opposite is true. We are good people. We do care about others, and when put to the test, we care even more than the non-autistic people who've been telling us how bad we are for years. So, how did the researchers take this revelation? They proved that the moral behaviour of autistic people in their test was different to their control subjects, but it wasn't to our disadvantage. We actually proved to be morally superior to our non-autistic counterparts. Look, world, we proved a difference, but it wasn't what we expected. There are good things about being autistic. They're less corruptible and more trustworthy. Perhaps we should think about putting autistic people in positions of power and trust because they're better suited. If they were true, inquiring scientists looking for answers, this is exactly what they would do. A genuine scientist thrives on learning what they don't know. They're just as happy to be proved wrong as proved right. I'll quote them again. Here, we show that ASD individuals are more inflexible when following a moral rule, even though an immoral action can benefit themselves, and suffer an undue concern about their ill-gotten gains and the moral cost. These findings deepen our understanding of the neurobiological roots that underlie atypical moral behaviour in ASD patients. Oh dear, it seems they weren't wrong after all. They have proved their point. It doesn't matter that our actions may be morally superior, our decisions kinder, and our thought process is more attuned towards helping others than helping ourselves. The problem is that we're not as selfish or unkind as other people, and that makes us broken. I'll read it again. This is evidence of atypical moral behaviours in ASD patients. Is that what autism research is all about? An attempt to prove that even good things are bad things because other people aren't as good as we are? They're actually saying that if a person is autistic, then kindness, generosity and moral fortitude are character flaws. They really said that. Doing the right thing is wrong if you're autistic. We've spent 80 years being told that our attention to detail is being obsessive, that our intense interests are too narrow, that our need for truth and clarity is dysfunctional communication. And now they want to tell us that being kind and incorruptible are a bad thing too? Forget Star Trek. What planet are these people on? Can't we have anything? This is why Bruce Maddox in The Measure of a Man came to mind when I read all this. Whatever barriers were put in the way of him dissecting data to further his own career, he twisted the narrative to his own ends, even to the point of denying data the right to resign his job or to make decisions for himself. He was willing to degrade a thinking, conscious being to the status of a toaster in order to get his research done. At one point, he even complains about how people having rights always gets in the way of his work. These researchers are no better. When faced with the realization that they've actually found evidence of autistic people being more well-adjusted than they themselves are, of having desirable, even admirable qualities that deserve respect, they cast it as a deficit because it's not normal to be so kind or caring of others. You know what? Not only did their research prove that autistic people actually had higher functional empathy in their test, the way they've twisted it proves how little empathy they have themselves as so-called scientists. They're a disgrace to the very word science if this is the depths they're willing to stoop to get their names in print. And would they watch the same episode I've been talking about and not realise that Maddox is actually the villain of the piece? Or would they see his determination to bend the rules to get his own way as somehow heroic? I mean, after all, they think that hurting others for one's own ends is typical behaviour. I'm not saying that all research into autism should stop, but if this is the direction it's being pushed to go in, it has no value whatsoever to anyone. You can't cast everything about us as a fault and not expect us to take offence.
This is not ego or vanity, but when Dr. Sung created me, he added to the substance of the universe. If by your experiments I am destroyed, something unique, something wonderful will be lost. I cannot permit that. I must protect his dream.
Thank you for watching. For more films on autistic life, click on the logo on the left to subscribe, or one of the links on the right to go straight to another video, or visit autistic.com.